Dr. Kim Tae-ho felt his stomach twist as the shuttle docked with the massive space station. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, Earth's first official meeting with an alien civilization. He checked his translation device one more time, making sure every setting was perfect. As humanity's top expert in dead languages, he never imagined his knowledge of ancient Korean and Sanskrit would be useful for talking to aliens. The station was bigger than anything humans had ever built. Gleaming metal corridors stretched in every direction, filled with soft blue light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Tae-ho followed Ambassador Park Ji-won and the rest of the human delegation toward the main conference room. His hands were sweating despite the cool air. When the doors opened, Tae-ho got his first real look at the Velnari. They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. Their faces were almost human-like but stretched longer, with large dark eyes that never seemed to blink. Most unsettling were their fingers, too long and too flexible, moving like they had extra joints. The lead Velnari stepped forward and made a sound that his translator turned into words. "Welcome, people of Earth. I am Council Leader Morthek. We hope this meeting brings understanding between our peoples." Ambassador Park bowed slightly and began the formal greetings they had practiced hundreds of times. Tae-ho stayed quiet, watching and listening. His job was to help if the translation systems failed or if cultural misunderstandings came up. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the Velnari brought out their sacred symbols. A young female Velnari named Shika stepped forward, carrying what looked like a tablet made of some kind of crystal. Her skin was brighter than the others, shifting between silver and pale blue. "These are the computational symbols of our ancestors," she explained through the translator. "We use them for our most important calculations and ceremonies." She touched the crystal tablet and symbols appeared in the air above it, glowing softly. Tae-ho leaned forward to get a better look, and his breath caught in his throat. The symbols weren't completely alien at all. They looked familiar in a way that made his skin crawl. The first symbol looked almost exactly like an ancient Korean Hanja character, meaning heaven or sky. The second one was similar to a Sanskrit symbol he had studied that meant journey or path. As more symbols appeared, Tae-ho saw patterns that reminded him of old Chinese characters, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and even some Celtic runes he had come across in his research. His mind started racing. How could alien symbols look so much like human writing? It had to be a coincidence, but the similarities were too strong to ignore. These weren't just vague resemblances. They were almost exact matches for symbols that were thousands of years old on Earth. Without thinking, Tae-ho stood up from his chair. The other humans looked at him in surprise, but he barely noticed. He was staring at one particular symbol that had just appeared, one that looked exactly like a combination of Korean and Sanskrit that he had seen in very old religious texts. "Excuse me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "That symbol there, does it mean star path or something similar?" The room went completely silent. Shika dropped her crystal tablet and it clattered on the metal floor. Her skin suddenly turned a deep purple color that Tae-ho had never seen before. All of the other Velnari started making rapid clicking sounds to each other. "How do you know that?" Shika whispered, and for some reason her words came through the translator as perfect Korean instead of English. Not modern Korean either, but the formal ancient style that scholars used when reading very old texts. Tae-ho felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "You just spoke Korean," he said slowly. "Ancient Korean." Shika's eyes went wide with what looked like terror. "You speak the dead language of our ancestors," she said, still in that perfect archaic Korean that made Tae-ho's spine tingle. "Ambassador." Park was looking back and forth between them with confusion. "What's happening? The translator isn't working properly." But Tae-ho understood perfectly. Somehow this alien girl was speaking a version of Korean that was older than anything still used on Earth. And somehow he had recognized symbols that should have been completely foreign to any human. The other Velnari were backing away from Shika, like she had done something terrible. Council Leader Morthek was making angry clicking sounds and gesturing at the human delegation. "We need to stop this meeting," Morthek said. The human delegation was quickly moved to a smaller room away from the main conference hall. Park So-jin could feel the tension in the air as thick as fog. As the team's cultural anthropologist, she had studied alien societies for years, but nothing had prepared her for what just happened. Sheikah was still shaking, her skin flickering between different shades of purple and silver. The other Velnari had left her alone with the humans, which seemed strange. So Jin noticed how they looked at the young translator now, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like fear mixed with respect. "We need to talk," Sheikah said quietly, still speaking that ancient Korean that made Taiho's eyes widen every time he heard it. But not here. Too many ears. Ambassador Park was getting frustrated. "Can someone please explain what's going on? Why isn't the translator working?" Sojin put a gentle hand on his arm. "Give us a moment, Ambassador. I think we're dealing with something much bigger than a translation error." 3 hours later, after official meetings had ended and most of the station had gone quiet, Sheikah appeared at their quarters. She moved like a ghost through the corridors, clearly trying not to be seen. When she slipped inside their room, Sojin noticed the young alien's hands were still trembling. "We cannot speak of this in front of others," Sheikah said, switching back to that perfect ancient Korean. "What happened today? It should not be possible." Taeho leaned forward eagerly. "But it did happen. You spoke Korean, and I understood. Your symbols, how is that possible?" Sheikah looked around the room nervously, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "The language you spoke, we call it Kethmorin. It is the lost tongue of the First Ones." "The First Ones?" Sojin asked, her anthropologist instincts kicking in. This sounded like mythology, but the fear in Sheikah's voice was very real. "Long ago, before any of our current civilizations existed, there were beings who traveled between the stars. They were the first to develop space travel, the first to create advanced technology. Our legends say they seeded wisdom across the galaxy before they vanished." Taiho was writing everything down as fast as he could. "And this Kethmorin was their language?" "Fragments of it," Sheikah nodded. "Only our highest priests are allowed to study the ancient texts that contain pieces of the first tongue. They spend decades learning to pronounce even a few words correctly. It is considered sacred, forbidden to most of us." Sojin felt a chill run down her spine. But Taeho spoke it naturally, like it was his native language. "That is what frightens me," Sheikah whispered. "And what frightens the council. You did not struggle with the pronunciation. You did not hesitate. You spoke Kethmorin as if you had been speaking it your whole life." The implications hit Sojin like a truck. If human languages contained elements of this mythical first tongue, it meant humanity wasn't just another random species that had developed space travel. It meant they were connected to something much older and more significant. "How much of this language do your priests know?" she asked. "Very little. Maybe a few hundred words scattered across different texts. Most of it has been lost to time. Our computers can barely translate the fragments we have." Taeho looked up from his notes. "I recognized at least a dozen of your symbols immediately. And not just Korean. I saw patterns that reminded me of Sanskrit, ancient Chinese, even some Celtic and Egyptian writing." Sheikah's skin went completely pale, almost white. "That is impossible. The First One's language should not exist in your world. Your species developed separately on a planet far from the old trade routes." "Unless we didn't develop separately," Sojin said quietly. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. "You think humans are connected to these First Ones?" Taeho asked. Sojin was already thinking through the possibilities. "Think about it. Earth has dozens of ancient languages that developed supposedly independently. Chinese, Sanskrit, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Korean Hanja, Celtic runes. But what if they weren't independent? What if they all came from the same source?" Sheikah was backing toward the door now, clearly terrified. "If that is true, if your people are descendants of the First Ones, the Coalition will never accept it." "Why not?" Sojin asked, though she was already starting to guess the answer. "Because the First Ones are not just our ancestors, they are our gods. Every species in the Coalition has legends about them. The Korthani believe the First Ones taught them to forge metal. The Zilmek say the First Ones showed them how to navigate space. If humans are their descendants, we would be seen as either gods ourselves or as imposters claiming divine heritage," Sojin finished. Sheikah nodded miserably. Either way, it would tear the coalition apart. Some would worship you, others would try to destroy you, and my people would never forgive me for being the one to discover this truth. As the young alien slipped back out into the corridor, Sojin realized their simple diplomatic mission had just become something much more dangerous. They weren't just representing humanity anymore. They might be carrying the genetic and linguistic legacy of an entire galactic civilization, and that kind of secret could start a war. For 3 nights in a row, Tae-ho barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those alien symbols dancing in his mind, matching perfectly with ancient human writing he had studied for years. On the 4th night, he couldn't take it anymore. He slipped out of his quarters and made his way through the dimly lit corridors of the space station. Sheikah was waiting for him in an abandoned storage room deep in the station's lower levels. She had brought what looked like several crystal tablets and some kind of portable computer that glowed with soft blue light. Her skin was darker than usual, almost gray, which Tae-ho had learned meant she was stressed or frightened. "I should not be doing this," she whispered as he sat down across from her. "If the council finds out I am sharing sacred texts with an outsider—" "Then why are you doing it?" Tae-ho asked gently. Sheikah's large eyes met his. "Because I need to know the truth. What happened in that meeting? It has haunted me for days. I keep thinking about how naturally you spoke the old words." She activated one of the crystal tablets, and ancient Velnari symbols appeared in the air between them. But these were different from the ones she had shown during the official meeting. These looked much older, more primitive, like they had been carved by hand rather than created by computer. "These are from our oldest religious texts," Sheikah explained. "Some of them are over 10,000 years old. We barely understand what they mean anymore." Tae-ho leaned forward and immediately saw what she meant. Mixed in with the clearly alien symbols were characters that made his heart race. There, clear as day, was an ancient Chinese character meaning wisdom. Next to it was something that looked exactly like a Korean Hanja symbol for journey. And scattered throughout the text were patterns that reminded him of Sanskrit, the ancient Indian language that formed the basis of many modern Asian languages. "This is incredible," he breathed. "These aren't just similar to human writing. They are human writing mixed with your language." The next night, Lee Min-ho joined them. As the mission's communications officer, he had access to the coalition's public databases and communication networks. What he brought to their secret meeting made all 3 of them stare in stunned silence. "I've been running searches through every coalition species' historical records," Min-ho said, setting up his portable computer. "I told the system I was researching ancient communication methods for better translation protocols. Nobody questioned. The data that filled their hidden workspace was overwhelming. Min-ho had found fragments of human languages scattered across the galaxy like breadcrumbs. The Korthani, a warrior species known for their fierce battle cries, had war chants that contained perfect Sanskrit mantras, not similar words, exact matches for prayers that Buddhist monks still chanted on Earth. "Listen to this," Min-ho said, playing an audio file. The Korthani battle cry was deep and guttural, but buried in the alien sounds were Sanskrit words that Tae-ho recognized immediately. Om Mani Padme Hum, a sacred Buddhist chant, meaning the jewel in the lotus. But it got stranger. The Zilmek, a species known for their elaborate burial rituals, decorated their tombs with symbols that looked exactly like Celtic runes. Not inspired by Celtic runes, not similar to them, they were Celtic runes, the same ones found carved on ancient stones in Ireland and Scotland. "How is this possible?" Sheikah asked, her skin flickering between purple and silver as she stared at the evidence. "These species evolved on different worlds, in different parts of the galaxy. They had no contact with each other until the coalition was formed." Min-ho pulled up more data streams. "It gets worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. I found 6 other coalition species that have these fragments. The Telvanni use symbols that match ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs in their medical texts. The Mordok have mathematical formulas that use the same notation as ancient Babylonian math. Even the Pixai, those little grey beings that barely talk to anyone, have architectural plans that use measurement systems identical to ancient Roman engineering. Tejo was writing furiously, trying to keep track of all the connections. "We're not just finding similarities," he said, looking up from his notes. "We're finding the exact same source language scattered across the galaxy, but that would mean—" Sheikah started, then stopped, afraid to finish the thought. "It would mean the first ones weren't just legends," Minho said quietly. "It would mean they were real, and they spread their language and knowledge to dozens of different species before they disappeared. Or before they became those species," Tejo added, and the room fell silent. The implications were staggering. If humans carried the most complete version of this ancient language in their various writing systems, it could mean they were the direct descendants of these mythical first ones, but it could also mean that every species in the coalition shared the same origin, that they were all children of the same ancient civilization, scattered across the stars and evolved into different forms over millions of years. "We need more evidence," Sheikah said finally. "If we're going to make claims like this, we need proof that cannot be questioned." Minho was already typing commands into his computer. "I know where to find it. The Coalition keeps archives of the oldest artifacts from each member species. If these connections are real, those artifacts should contain even more examples of shared language and symbols." As they planned their next move, none of them realized they were being watched. Deep in the station's security center, Council Leader Morthek reviewed the surveillance footage of their secret meetings with growing alarm. The humans weren't just accidentally stumbling onto forbidden knowledge, they were actively seeking it out, and what they were finding threatened to destroy everything the Coalition had built. Dr. Yoon Hana had always been fascinated by old things. As humanity's top xenoarchaeologist, she spent most of her time studying alien artifacts and trying to understand how different species had developed their technologies. When Tejo contacted her about the language discoveries, she knew she had to see the evidence for herself. The artifact sat in the Coalition's main archaeological vault, 3 levels below the diplomatic station. It was about the size of a basketball, made from some kind of dark metal that seemed to absorb light. According to the records, it had been found on an abandoned world at the edge of Coalition space over 50 years ago. Every attempt to activate it had failed. "The readings are unlike anything we've seen," Hana whispered as she ran her scanner over the object. "The metal contains elements that don't exist naturally anywhere in known space. And look at these symbols carved into the surface." Tejo, Minho, and Sheikah crowded around her in the dimly lit vault. They had snuck down here after midnight, using Sheikah's access codes to bypass security. What they saw made their hearts race. The symbols covering the artifact were a perfect mix of every ancient human language they had been studying. Korean Hanja flowed into Sanskrit characters, which blended seamlessly into Egyptian hieroglyphs and Celtic runes. It was like someone had created the ultimate dictionary of human writing and carved it into alien metal. "I've seen patterns like this before," Hana said, pulling out her research tablet. "In ancient Sumerian texts, there are legends about objects that could only be awakened by speaking the first words, the original language that gave birth to all others." Sheikah's skin was flickering rapidly between different colors. "This is one of the lost artifacts of the first ones. My people have searched for objects like this for generations. Most believe they are just myths." "Well, it's real enough," Minho said, recording everything with his scanner. "But how do we activate it?" Hana studied the symbols more carefully. After years of working with ancient languages, she had developed an instinct for how they fit together. I think you need to read these symbols out loud, but not in any single language. You need to speak them as they flow together." Tejo looked nervous. "Are you sure that's safe? We don't know what this thing does." "Only one way to find out," Hana said with the kind of smile that had gotten her into trouble on archaeological digs across 3 different planets. She took a deep breath and began to read the symbols, letting the different languages flow together naturally. Ancient Korean blended with Sumerian words, which mixed with Sanskrit phrases and Egyptian sounds. It felt strange but oddly natural, like she was remembering a language she had once known but forgotten. At first, nothing happened. Then the artifact began to glow with a soft golden light. The metal surface started to warm under her hands, and the symbols began to pulse in rhythm with her words. "It's working," Minho breathed. But then something unexpected happened. The artifact didn't just activate. It sent out a pulse of energy that Hana could feel in her bones. The pulse spread outward from the station, faster than light, reaching across space to touch every world in the coalition. On the Velnari homeworld, ancient monuments that had been dark for thousands of years suddenly blazed with light. Korathani warriors stopped their training as old battle standards began glowing with symbols their ancestors had carved, but never understood. The Zilmek cemetery worlds erupted with light as every grave marker activated at once, displaying messages in languages that had been dead for millennia. Throughout coalition space, dormant technology that had been sleeping since before recorded history suddenly came online. Museums had to evacuate as ancient artifacts began projecting holographic displays. Archaeological sites became beacons of light visible from orbit. The reaction was immediate and panicked. Within hours, Coalition High Command was in emergency session. Admiral Koltaran, the Supreme Military Commander, called for immediate action. "This cannot be a coincidence," he declared to the assembled leaders. "The humans arrive and suddenly every First One artifact in Coalition space activates. They are either the prophesied return of our ancestors, or they are dangerous imposters who have somehow stolen the power of the gods. We need to detain them immediately," agreed Councillor Velthara, "until we understand what they have done and how they did it." Back on the station, alarms were blaring. Hana was still holding the artifact, which continued to pulse with warm light. Through the vault's small window, they could see Coalition security forces running through the corridors. "We need to go," Sheikah said urgently. "Now." But it was too late. The vault doors slammed shut and they could hear security codes being entered from the outside. They were trapped. "Emergency exit," Minho said, pointing to a maintenance hatch near the ceiling. "All these old stations have them." They climbed up into the narrow maintenance tunnel just as security forces burst into the vault. Hana still clutched the artifact, which made their escape easier to track since it glowed like a beacon. But Sheikah knew the station's layout better than the security teams. "This way," she whispered, leading them through twisting passages that ran between the station's walls. "There's a maintenance shuttle in Docking Bay 7. If we can reach it..." Behind them, they could hear security forces shouting orders. Coalition. Command had issued arrest warrants for the entire human delegation. They were being branded as either divine beings or dangerous criminals, and Hana wasn't sure which option was worse. As they crawled through the narrow tunnel, Sheikah was breathing hard from fear and exertion. "My grandmother always told stories. About this day," she panted. "She said the First Ones would return speaking the tongue of 1,000 worlds, and when they did, all the old machines would wake up again." "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman," Hana said, still clutching the glowing artifact. "She also said," Sheikah continued as they reached another junction in the tunnel system, "that when the First Ones returned, the galaxy would have to choose between wisdom and war." The sound of security forces was getting closer. Whatever choice the galaxy was going to make, it looked like war was winning. The escape from the station had been a nightmare. Coalition security forces hunted them across 3 different worlds. Before Sheikah managed to get them to the one place no one would think to look, the ancient ruins beneath the Coalition capital itself. "Most people think these tunnels are just old mining shafts," Sheikah explained as she led them deeper underground. Her skin had turned almost black with stress, and she kept looking over her shoulder. "But my grandmother used to bring me here when I was young. She said these passages were much older than anyone realized. The artifact in Hana's backpack continued to pulse with that strange golden light, getting brighter the deeper they went. It was almost like the thing was guiding them toward something specific. After hours of walking through narrow stone corridors, they found it. A massive door carved directly into the living rock, covered with symbols that made all of them stop and stare. Every human language was represented there, not just the ancient ones they had been studying, but modern languages too. Korean, English, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, all mixed together with alien scripts in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "This is it," Taiho whispered. "This is what we've been looking for." The door had a single handprint carved into its center, Surrounded by words in what looked like the purest form of that ancient language they had been piecing together, Hana stepped forward and placed her hand on the print. Nothing happened. "Let me try," Taiho said. When his hand touched the carved stone, the words around it began to glow softly. He started reading them aloud, letting the ancient Korean flow from his lips as naturally as breathing. The sounds echoed in the narrow corridor, seeming to resonate with the stone itself. With a grinding noise that shook dust from the ceiling, the massive door began to open. Inside was a chamber larger than anything they had expected. The walls stretched up into darkness, covered with holographic displays that activated as they entered. But it wasn't the size of the room that made them gasp. It was what the holograms were showing. The displays showed the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. But instead of the dozens of different species that made up the coalition today, there was only one. Beings that looked almost human, but somehow more. Taller, with larger eyes and longer fingers, faces that held wisdom and sadness in equal measure. "The first ones," Sheikah breathed, her skin turning pale silver. A new hologram activated, showing one of these beings speaking directly to the camera. When it spoke, the words came out in that pure ancient language, but somehow all of them understood it perfectly. "If you are seeing this message, then our plan has succeeded," the being said. "The end is coming for us, but we have found a way to preserve what we were. Our knowledge, our memories, our very essence will continue in new forms across the galaxy." Obey. Holograms appeared, showing the final years of the First One's civilization. A cosmic disaster was approaching, something that would destroy their homeworld and scatter their people to the stars. But instead of simply fleeing, they had chosen to do something far more ambitious. "We have seeded the galaxy with ourselves," the holographic being continued. "Our genetic patterns will spread to 1,000 worlds, evolving into countless new forms. Our language will fragment and change, becoming the foundation for thousands of new ways of speaking and thinking. We will die as a unified species, but live on as the ancestors of all who come after." Taiho was staring at the display with tears in his eyes. They didn't just influence other species. They became other species. The hologram showed the process in stunning detail. First One's volunteers had their genetic material modified and scattered across the galaxy, designed to evolve into different forms on different worlds. Some became the tall, graceful Velnari. Others evolved into the warrior-like Korthani. Still, others became the small, clever Zilmek, or the dozens of other species that now made up the coalition, and some became humans. "We are not descended from the First Ones," Hana said quietly, watching the genetic charts flowing across the walls. "We are the First Ones, all of us, every species in the coalition," but the holograms weren't finished. The final message showed the First One's greatest hope and greatest fear. They had built fail-safes into their plan, ways for their scattered children to rediscover their shared heritage when they were ready. The artifacts, the language fragments, the genetic memories, all of it was designed to eventually lead back to chambers like this one. "When our children find each other among the stars," the holographic being said, "they will have a choice. They can remain as they are, separate species learning to cooperate, or they can remember what they truly are, one people who chose to become many so that they might survive and grow." Outside the chamber, they could hear the rumble of coalition warships in the sky above. Through Sheikah's communications device, they listened to the debates raging across coalition space. Some species wanted to worship humanity as the returned gods. Others wanted to destroy them as dangerous imposters. Fear and religious fervor were tearing the coalition apart. "We have to make a choice," Minho said, looking at the final holographic display. "Do we tell them the truth?" Hana looked around at her companions, Taiho with his gift for ancient languages, Minho with his technical expertise, and Sheikah who had risked everything to help them find the truth. "If we reveal this, everything changes. Humans won't just be another species seeking membership in the coalition. We'll be seen as either the parents of every sentient being in the galaxy or as the destroyers of their individual identities." "And if we don't reveal it?" Taiho asked. Then the coalition tears itself apart anyway, Sheikah said sadly. Too many people saw what happened when the artifacts activated. They know something has changed. The sound of aircraft was getting closer. Soon coalition forces would find the entrance to these tunnels. They had maybe an hour to decide the fate of every thinking being in the galaxy. Hannah looked at the glowing artifact in her hands, then at the holographic displays showing the First One's final message. The ancient beings had faced this same choice millions of years ago. Unity or diversity, one people or many. They had chosen both. Maybe, she said slowly, the choice isn't ours to make alone. Maybe it's time to let the galaxy decide for itself what it wants to become. Outside, the first coalition dropships were landing near the ruins. The future of galactic civilization was about to be decided. And somehow, a small group of humans and one brave Velnari translator had found themselves at the center of it all. The First One's greatest experiment was about to face its ultimate test. Through the translator, his words sharp and cold. There has been a misunderstanding. But Tejo knew it wasn't a misunderstanding at all. Something much bigger was happening here. Something that connected humanity to these aliens in ways that should have been impossible. As security guards moved to escort the humans out, he caught Sheikah's eye one more time. She mouthed a single word in that ancient Korean, dangerous.